Okay, so today I'm gonna be going over some a little bit more advanced kind of wall techniques and drawing kind of tools and things like that, such as the kind of edit profile abilities, stacked walls, some different ways of doing stacked walls, wall join options, and wall openings. So to get into it, we're gonna come up here and hit our wall tool. The brick on metal stud should work just fine. So I'm gonna just draw, say, a 10-foot little section here. I'm gonna throw this on fine. That way we can kind of see our layers. So the first thing I'll show is the edit profile option. So if I go to, say, my north elevation here, you can see I'm going to go ahead and constrain this to level 2. So if I select my wall, you can see I have this option up here, edit profile. So this can be nice if, let's say my, actually let's make this like 30 feet. That way we've got a good run of it. Let's say I'm working on a project and my grade does something like this. I've got a sloping site and I need to step my foundation. Do I need to draw a wall every single time that it steps and then reconstrain the bottom? No, you don't have to. You can go into this edit profile. It gives you the exterior of the wall, and then you can come in and sketch offsets kind of however you want them to go. It doesn't really matter how you sketch it, and then kind of trim everything up. It should work just fine. The green is going to be the reference plane or the limits of the wall itself. You can draw outside of those, but if you stay within those limits, if I all of a sudden were to extend this wall down, it will keep that wall going and keep my profile kind of within the bounds of where I drew it. If I go outside of that, now I kind of break the edge of those, and when I extend stuff, it might create errors and things like that. So it's usually a little bit better option to stay within the confines of that wall. If for whatever reason I wanted to draw something that was outside the confines, it might be better for me to actually extend this wall beyond what I want it to be, and then come in and draw that kind of within there and cut out where I don't want it. Just for how things kind of work if you ever were to edit that later on. So the edit profile option, if I don't like or I want to revert back to my other initial wall, I can always come up here and hit reset profile, and it'll jump back to the exterior confines of the wall, that dashed line. We'll go back to our 30 feet here. So you can also, you don't have to work just within the exterior. You could draw, all sorts of various kind of holes in the wall itself. Anything that you sketch on that is going to go all the way through the wall. It's not going to be just a reveal where it kind of creates a little inset. That would be something that you would have to create using other tools. But this is an option for creating some kind of different ways of doing stuff. There's also these other tools called wall openings. So you can, let's say I want to go to, we'll say by face. Actually, we'll just do with the wall opening here. And then I can sketch and just draw wall openings in there. And I can set, distances. I can set top and base offsets, constraints and everything for the opening itself. I don't necessarily have those options with the edit profile tool, but this is a rectangular kind of limitation to it. Whereas the edit profile option, I have, I've got all of my tools to kind of create different and kind of crazy shapes to get the look that I'm after. So that's a kind of nice tool to use for a variety of different circumstances. It could be the stepping of your foundation. It could be creating different sort of looks for it. It could also be at the very end of maybe you have a wall that you want to taper. Sometimes, I'll hear people complain about, well, how do I get a wall to, just do something like that? That's an easy way to go about doing it, is just creating an edit profile sketch for it. So if let's say we revert that back. So the edit profile tool can be handy for a couple different things like that. Especially if you have little offsets at the very ends of walls or whatever. It'll prevent you from drawing too many different walls, as opposed to just running one and then doing a sketch and kind of resolving it that way. So the edit profile tool can be useful in that sense. If we go back to our floor plan here and go up to walls, there's a stacked wall down here at the bottom that comes out of the box. It's your brick over CMU with metal stud. So if I sketch this wall and go to my 3D view, you'll see that I have this offset down here. I've got a kind of thicker wall on the bottom and then a brick wall on the top with the CMU. The way that this stacked wall works is if I go into the properties, the edit type, and the structure, all I have are these options here. These are all of the same wall types that I have in my drop down over here. I can select any of those to be on the top, any of those to be on the bottom. I can offset them back and forth to get whatever kind of profile I want out of that. The bottom one, then I can set the height, so maybe I want the CMU to actually be 4 feet tall. I can adjust that. It can be useful in the right circumstances. I personally have never actually used them. I just find them to be very cumbersome and kind of unforgiving when it comes to making changes and things in the future. So like we were just discussing, let's say we had a situation where we had to step our foundation and we wanted to edit the profile here and do a couple steps. When we do that with a stacked wall, similar to if you watch my video on the structure of walls and the reveals and the sweeps, it doesn't really behave the way that you would like it to. It creates this kind of weird up and down, and then this doesn't actually step with it. So if you have a continuous line around, that's fine. But then if all of a sudden we're turning the corner with it, and this, say, steps up, maybe we want this to actually step up to the level of the other one. Now we've got we've got a wall joint issue, we've got a weird transition issue, we've got all sorts of problems here that are just going to be a nightmare to kind of deal with. So the stacked wall tool is there if you want to give it a shot. I've always found that I always tend to default to giving myself more flexibility, more ability to change and adapt in the future. So the way that I would go about creating, say, this condition or this wall type is by going in and saying, okay, what are the two wall types that I want to use here? I'm going to use the brick on metal stud. So I've got my brick on metal stud there, and then I've also got, I want my CMU on metal stud as well. Now when I go to draw this one, I'm going to draw this from the finish face interior, and I'm going to grab there, and you can see as I'm drawing this, you'll see the layers. See how my metal stud overlaps perfectly there? That's kind of what I'm looking for, because I want the metal stud, regardless of what my exterior finish is, I want my structural layer, my stud layer, to actually be perfectly in line there. So if I draw that there, and then draw another one this way, you'll hear the error it's giving me because these are just overlapping right now. But So what I'll do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, okay, my CMU wall, I'm going to make it 4 feet tall. So I make those 4 feet tall. My brick, I'm going to offset the base 4 feet so that it sits directly on top. So now I've got basically the same situation as what I did with the stacked wall, only I've got these as two separate entities that I can then manipulate separately to keep these. So let's say this entire wall wanted to shift out. So maybe all of a sudden this section of wall need to bump out 6 inches. If I do that, all of a sudden one wall, I've got to move one wall, then I got to move the other wall. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into, say, my west view here, where I can see these two wall types there. And I'm going to go to modify, and I'm going to go to align. And I'm going to say, okay, the inside of that wall and the inside of that wall I want to be aligned. Now as soon as I click that, you'll notice this lock occurs. I'm going to lock that, which basically sets a parameter that says this face will always be in line with that face. If maybe your interior finish changes at that point, or there's some other reason that maybe the interior face isn't what you want to line up, you can create a section through these and change this to fine. And we could say, okay, I want to modify, I want to align the face of my structure. So I'm going to hit tab. As I can't directly select that, but if I hit tab, I can say, okay, the interior face of my metal stud, the interior face of that metal stud, I'm locking those together. So now if I take this wall and say I move it 8 inches this way, that's going to move with it. So now those two walls are locked together there, and I should be good to go. I can also create something between the top of this wall and the bottom of that wall and lock those together. So now if I increase this to 5 foot, well, that one, yeah, so that jumped. So if I align the bottom of that wall, top of that wall, and now all of a sudden I want to change this from like 3 foot, now I want to jump it to 2 foot, I can control these two walls as if they were one stacked wall, just like this. But it also gives me the ability to do things like this, where, let's undo that real quick. I want this bottom one to be 4 foot. This gives me control of the profile of the bottom and the profile of the top. So if all of a sudden I want, say I have a step in my foundation here, I can all of a sudden jump this up, and as long as, remember, I have a outside border here. The outside border of this wall is what is locked to the top. So as long as this one is constantly going to move with the top of this one I'm just sketching in there. So I can go ahead and jump that, and then I can come in and hit edit profile and grab those two. And now I can create a step detail with that same kind of stacked wall look, but actually get more control out of it and get what I want out of this sort of condition. So this is the way that I tend to work with stacked walls. I like to lock two different wall types together as opposed to actually using a stacked wall, like wall type, I guess you would call it. But this just tends to give more flexibility. It gives you more ability to control the individual walls. As long as you lock things together and align them in the way that you shouldn't have any real issues with them. If you don't lock them together, you're going to have some problems. But as you go through, if you lock them together, you should be in good shape there. So that's basically stacked walls. If we want to get into some wall joint issues, let's say we go into and grab, let's use a little bit simpler wall. So we'll say like a 5.5 inch interior partition. So let's say we've got a small little step in this like let's say we've got a run of wall here, and then we've got a run of wall kind of coming in here, and we have this tiny little jog here. And when you do a tiny little jog like that, sometimes you'll get weird conditions like this that happen. So let's flip this, and we'll flip that back, so that way the double gyp layer is all on the same side. So what it's doing is it's trying to resolve this, but it's saying, okay, the center of this wall, the center of this wall, I just don't have enough room to make all of this work. What we can do to kind of resolve this is under Modify, we can come up to Wall Joints. And under Wall Joints, as we go over this, we can highlight this a little bit. And I'll click on that. Click on this wall joint here. There we go. So now it starts to show a little bit different options and things like that. I can start to hit Next and scroll through different ways that these things can join together. So as soon as I get one that works, I'll say, okay, that one's good. I can click off of that. And then if I grab the other end, sometimes it works to kind of back things out and then reconnect them. So let's say we can try miters. Nope, it doesn't like miter. So we can just start to kind of play with this a little bit, and we'll go and scroll through a couple different options. So that works for that side. And then if we grab the end here, so another good example of how this location line makes a difference. So if I switch this to finish face exterior, now I have my control point on the outside. Now I can drag that and actually get that to connect there. So the location line can also make a difference. But these wall joints can also come into play and make how things come together a little bit trickier as well. So let's say we end up with a situation kind of like this. So we want something coming in, and we've got a bunch of different kind of connections and points here. Okay, so this is creating a weird condition here. So if I go to wall joints and select here, now you're seeing kind of how this is. It's got my stud layer for this one kind of coming in, this one coming in this direction, and then this one is stopping. So this one is kind of overriding this one. I can scroll through and start to go through a whole bunch of different options here of how I want that joint to look. So maybe I want that one, probably not. Maybe that's probably a framing kind of nightmare if this is how you want to frame that one in. Now this one's kind of different. But as you scroll through, you can get some slightly better or different options of how this might all kind of work together. So that one's probably the cleanest one that I've got, and once I get rid of it, it kind of gets rid of the stud layer and how that all works together. This is also important when you have windows very close to corners, because occasionally a layer will stick into the window and you might need to come up to the wall joints and just throw that on miter or something like that to get rid of the structural layer sticking into your window. Because maybe you have a window in this wall right here, but if this is coming in and this structural layer is sticking into this structural layer about here and your window is right here, you're going to see that little piece coming through because the window is cutting this wall, not that wall. So this one's actually going to stick into the window. If you come in with a wall joints and just miter it at the corner, that'll eliminate the problem and you should be fine. So that's a brief little rundown of kind of wall joints, of stacked walls and how I like to use them, and then just kind of how edit profile and things like that work.